First of all, I have to say that I've been looking forward to this panel because my husband and I actually fell in love in Kansas City.
Really?
We had some ribs at Arthur Bryant's, and that was all it took.
That was all it took. Huh? All right, I got it.
So the Honorable Sly James was sworn in as the 56th mayor of Kansas City, Missouri. That was on March 22nd, 2011, 8 years ago. Yesterday afternoon, he gave his 8th and final State of the City address. Included some great live music, kind of like what we heard, kind of. It was
Yeah.
your first walk-up music, as he pointed out. You talked about things, what you might have done differently, what you shouldn't have said, and you said, for the record, there isn't much that you shouldn't have said when it comes to guns and education.
Right.
Educational disparities, gun violence, these have understandably been issues that have disturbed you and really been a priority. So when you first took office in 2011, I'm curious, what were the inequalities, Mayor James, that you faced that bothered you, that disturbed you the most?
I had the great pleasure of, within a month of being inaugurated, a little more than a month being inaugurated, I was in Baltimore for my first U.S. Conference of Mayors meeting. And at that meeting, I met Ralph Smith of the Annie Casey Foundation in grade level reading. And he really did educate me about the absolute importance of third grade reading proficiency and what it meant to a child's academic life and to their life thereafter. So when I came back to Kansas City, we have 15 school districts in whole or in part in Kansas City. It's a ridiculous number. And we took a data dump of what was going on with third grade reading. And on average, it was 33.8% proficient third grade readers, but in the
1/3.
1/3.
Yeah.
And in the predominantly African American school district, the namesake school district, it was 19%. And what drove me nuts was that nobody was upset about it. You know, so I thought that it fit right with my personality. I have this marvelous ability to upset people. So I went about doing my job.
I just love that. That's a bumper sticker. Go ahead.
So we started Turn the Page KC with the goal of trying to get all children reading proficiently at third grade, regardless of zip code, age, color, socioeconomics. And over the years that we've been doing it now, almost 8 years, it's a collective impact model. We work with a ton of groups. We've managed to get that 33.8% up to 55%, but still, the predominantly African American school district is lagging far behind their suburban, more suburban type peers. So now what we're pushing is early pre-K, because the bottom line is kids born in poverty hear 30 million words fewer than their middle income peers by the time they're 3 years old.
30 million fewer
30
words.
million fewer words.
Right.
That's an enormous amount of not talking and people not socializing children, not necessarily because they're mean or evil. Sometimes they don't know the importance. Sometimes they're busy trying to make a living. Their hierarchy of needs may be different.
Right. So you mentioned in your final State of the City address, I did watch it, you said a gardener and a mayor are similar. You have to keep a lot of things growing and planning for the next season. Plant seeds that you may never see grow to their full potential. So you have sowed a few seeds. You talked about your Turn the Page KC program,
Right.
where the third level, or third graders in terms of reading level. You've overseen the rebirth of your downtown. You brokered a new convention hotel, and you are building a better airport with just on Monday. A ceremony to kind of mark that. So here at Bloomberg, we like to keep some data. So I wanted to just show the impact of some of the seeds that Mayor James has sown when it comes to things like economic equity, education. So let's bring up the charts, if we may. Just got a few. And one we have on the percentage of people living below the poverty level in Kansas City, it's been declining since 2014.
Doesn't feel like it.
Doesn't feel like it.
No, and it doesn't feel like it because there's still way too many people who are living below the poverty level. And some
What
of their
holds most of them back? Because you talk so much, of course, about education. Got to start young. But what is it?
Our education system has failed generations of people. And those people, because their educations have failed them, don't necessarily put the same emphasis on it for their children. But the school districts haven't changed. The methods of teaching haven't changed. It's the same old, and somehow expecting a different result. So I think that's one of the problems. I think there is also institutionalized racism that definitely has an impact. I think that there are places, Kansas City, frankly, is a segregated city. I'm a member of the Board of Trustees of Urban Land Institute, and one of the people that founded Urban Land Institute, um, uh, mine is losing here, and I've lost his
You're
name.
thinking about opening day. I know where you are.
Yeah, but he also was responsible for segregating the city by putting covenants in real estate contracts that
Right.
kept minorities in a certain part of town and others out.
It's not a new problem, though, and you've had it 8 years. What do you feel like has made the biggest impact on improving an individual, an African American's economic situation in your city?
We've been very diligent and intentional about skilling people up after the recession, trying to get them into new areas of work. We've been very intentional about trying to do some things in the community that would generate jobs and economic activity. We've been very intentional about putting money into the community in terms of infrastructure, which would then allow businesses to come in and operate. And we've been very intentional about focusing on kids in school, and in the process of doing that, drawing parents into that conversation,
Right.
which has helped somewhat.
Got a few more charts I want to bring up, some of those
Sure.
other seeds that you've sown. This is about high school diplomas, the percentage that obtain a high school diploma or more. That, too, has been going up since the crisis. It's pretty impressive.
It is impressive, still short of where we need to be. And again, all of those numbers take into account the performance of probably all of the school districts in whole or in part. But if you put up just the KCPS numbers, those numbers would be drastically lower. And that's what bothers me. There is an inequality in education in this city and frankly in this entire country. One of the things that isn't reflected here is the mobility of African American and Latino children, which really does hurt their academic performance. Another thing is the ridiculously biased suspension and expulsion rate. Out of every 100 African American males in school, 65 suspensions for that. Now, some of them are saying people multiple suspensions, but 65 out of 100 is crazy. When you also look at the fact that kids in pre-K institutions are being suspended. How the heck do you get suspended from pre-K?
And now,
I mean, seriously. To me, that's like, duh.
so I mean, that's a lot, left or side. How do you deal with some of that? How
Well-
have you been able to make a difference?
Well, we focused on equity, and we focused on trying
What
to
does that mean?
Well, one of the things we're in the middle of a race and inequality series now. The first session that we had was starting the conversation, and by that we had to get everybody to understand the terms that we were being used. Because if I ask people out here what's racism, I probably get 100 different answers.
Right.
But before you can have a reasonable conversation, we have to agree on some basics. So we started that conversation, and in the process of starting that conversation and bringing the community into that conversation and the two subsequent ones, then we have been able to talk about that. But we also had suspension summits where we brought in educators and interested parties, and we're going to have another. We had it 2 years ago. We're going to have another one this May.
Has it changed the numbers?
Are
those kindergarten kids not getting expelled anymore?
That we believe there's some
just kidding.
anecdotal.
Yeah.
We believe there's anecdotal evidence to indicate that it's been better.
Yeah.
But we're getting the numbers. We're going to have a follow up in May, and we're going to look at that data and have another conference at that time. We've had mobility conferences. We've worked with parents to empower parents. And get them engaged so that they can be advocates for their children.
All the stakeholders, in other words.
You got to. I mean, everything's connected. Everything's connected. That's why pre-K is so important. You know, really, if we were smart, we would do exactly what Jeffrey Canada did. We'd be in the hospitals talking to pregnant families about brain development, letting them know that that first 5 years is where the brain explosion happens. And if you mess it up in the first 5 years, you're going to spend the next 60 years trying to fix it. So we're better off spending the money up front and making the investment and getting a return than we are spending it on the back end in prisons and getting nothing out of it.
Hallelujah. All right, I have a few more charts, but I'm going to go through them quickly.
I like charts.
All right. We do too. Unemployment rate, the overall trend line down and below the national rate, and the purple line is Kansas City. So you've been down below the national rate. You guys have been doing well. Hang on.
Okay.
Hang on. Housing price index, let's pull that up as well. That has too been going up since 2013. You can see the bar chart. Crimes reported. Hmm.
Crime, yeah, we
Yeah.
don't even want to talk about
Yeah,
that.
well, we will. Crimes involvement, and this is where, and I think you make a really important distinction, and data sometimes loses it. We've got to break it out by backgrounds, by race, because it tells a much smarter story. So crime involvement split by race, and let's see if we can pull that up. There we go.
Yeah.
So more black involvement in crime, leveling off, going down, and you can see obviously the white is the white involvement, and the blue is the black involvement in crime. Crime has been something that you've been involved in. Before we get your response, I do have a poll for everybody, and I want to pull you into this conversation as well. Everyone pull out their phones, and then you could respond.
All right.
What should be the priority of a mayor to his or her citizens? Because we've been already talking about. Number 1, safety. Where is it? There it is. 2, education. 3, affordable housing. Number 4 is jobs. So it's coming in. Safety looks like it's number 1. Mayor James, how did you prioritize these kinds of things? Safety, education, affordable housing, jobs. You were looking at all of this stuff. How'd you prioritize it? Because that's a pretty full plate.
Well, my agenda was a 4E agenda: education, governmental efficiency, enforcement of the laws, and employment. So we
4E,
categorized
right?
the 4E agenda. But if of all the things, if I had to pick one thing that I would focus on, I would go for education. Because I think that if you have education, if we instill education and make high quality education available to everybody, I mean, really, how many times do you see PhDs shooting master's degree candidates on the street corner? You just don't.
I do know. I now know what you're doing after you're out of mayor's office. You've got a circuit, right?
Writing jingles?
A comedy circuit.
But
No, but you're right, right?
education,
For the most part,
is education is a great equalizer, to the extent that you have equalizers. It's one of those things that gets you past the door. It gives you options. You don't have to necessarily be engaged in risky behavior if you have a good education. You have more options than if you don't. Our problem is that we have too many people who have had failing educational outcomes, and because of that, we have a higher level of crime. The earlier chart that showed the level of black versus non-black involvement in crime, there's another overlay to that, and that is location. Because crime is, some of our crime is disproportionately located in areas where there is poverty, which are almost per se people of color. And in a 13 square mile area in a city that is 318 square miles, which is pretty big, 5 San Franciscos fit in Kansas City, we have about 70% of all the homicides and gun violence in that one area. And guess where it is? In the place where there's the lowest educational attainment, where there's the lowest median income, where there's the highest rate of poverty and assistance needed, where there is just about every negative thing that you can say is concentrated there. And when you have people who are trapped in a hopeless end cycle, then they're going to do things they shouldn't do. If they can't get their own stuff, they're going to come and take yours.
And I think you could talk to a lot of mayors around the country, right?
Yeah.
There's cities that are doing that. Troost Avenue, right?
Yeah.
This is what you've been working on.
Yeah.
Depending on east-west determines a lot, potentially, in terms of your fate.
Absolutely.
You actually, grew up east of Troost?
I did.
Okay, and that's predominantly a black neighborhood.
Yes.
West of Troost is white.
Predominantly.
Predominantly.
Yeah.
You've been working to change that.
Well, you know,
Or have you?
I just want to be clear. When you say you,
Wow.
there's a big
I know,
you,
I know.
and I'm not talking about my stomach. There's a lot of people in that you, but we have been intentional about blurring that out.
But how do you do something that has been so entrenched for so many years? Because I think this is what really stops people. They can't figure out how to mix it up, make it more diverse.
Well, one thing that you can do, and one of the things we've tried to do is, first of all, we've identified it as a problem. Second of all, we've tried to make strategic investments in that area. And by doing that, we have been able to create more economic activity. Now, the problem that you always have, and it's something that I am not smart enough to have figured out, I get a lot of hue and cry for, you've got to do something for this neighborhood. You've got to bring more investment here. Okay, we'll bring more investment there. But now you've gentrified it. I don't know how to make it better and keep it cheap. I just don't know. I'm serious. It's a
Yeah,
serious
yeah,
problem
right. Without
because
pushing out kind of the
without
locals.
pushing out. So one of the things that we think will help, although it's another difficulty, it's the housing issue,
Yeah.
is if we can bring the investment to the area while we're simultaneously creating more affordable housing, then it gives people more options. But the other thing that we thought about was simply abating their property taxes so that as the property around them rose and their property rose in value as well, and their taxes remained the same, then they could slowly build equity in the property that they could either get out when they sell or that they could use to borrow. Now the problem is that in the minority neighborhoods, borrowing is a lot more difficult than in the majority neighborhoods. So that's
Right.
not necessarily
And if you
going to
can
work.
get it, it's a lot more expensive.
Exactly. And that's borrowing to do renovations or whatever else you might want to do, not just a commercial loan or a personal loan or anything like that.
So what else needs to be done along Troost Avenue?
We are doing, you know what's really funny? Troost Avenue has for years been considered to be the racial dividing line. And now we've almost kind of pushed it further east over to Prospect, which is close to where I live,
Yeah.
because we've made so much investment in that area. One of the first things that I did when I got into town or into office was we had huge swatches of property that had been ill managed under the housing authority years before, been in federal receivership for 20-something years. So the first thing we did was get that property out of receivership. And all I had to do was go sit in the federal courthouse and say hi to the judge that I knew because I've been practicing law and seen him before. I sat there and he said, "This is the first time the mayor's ever come to one of these hearings. You must take it seriously." I said, "I am not here being bored out of my mind listening to people talk about the receiverships for no reason, Judge. We need this property out." And so we get the property out, we get it rehabbed, and now it's on the market at affordable rates. So all those things are all tied together.
So I am curious because you've got a smart city that you're working on. You're working on attracting investment. What makes the biggest difference? I think, we look around at our world today, our country, and how divided it is and how unequal it is. And how do we change that? What has made the biggest difference in your own city?
This is going to sound kind of weird, but the biggest difference is that we have changed our attitude. You cannot change actions if you don't change your attitude. So we had to change our attitude about who we are, what's important, what are we going to do about it, do we work together or not? And we have had a number of really fantastic successes by working together. And when people see that, oh, okay, if we do it this way, we're going to get this result, now more people are doing it. But changing our attitude. We used to be a city that wanted to compare ourselves to other cities. Now other cities want to compare themselves to us, which is a good thing. And we used to always say, and there were times when we would say internally, "We love Kansas City. It's a great place to raise kids. Don't tell anybody." Okay? Now we want to tell everybody. We've also had some things that have helped us out quite a bit, serendipitous things. Being the first city with Kansas City, Kansas to have Google fiber to the home, big deal. We didn't even have to change our name or get 100,000 people to lay in the snow in brightly colored suits. We just did our thing, and voila, here it is. But one of the things that happened there, Google was smart. They
Right.
were really smart. In order for them to make sure that they had demand, they set up these fiber hoods, which were either whole or parts of neighborhoods. And the idea was that in order to reserve your spot in the queue to have the fiber laid in your neighborhood, you had to put down a $10 deposit. So the first group to put down the most $10 deposits wound up first in the queue. And what we saw was right along Troost Avenue, the green side was good, the red side was bad. West of Troost, green, east of Troost, bad. So we immediately jumped in and started a digital equity plan, which included providing refurbished hardware, classes, and education about the need for broadband and how it can be used. And so that helped. All of these things are interconnected. The one thing that I think is most important from a mayor standpoint is be accessible. Be out there. You got to be out there listening and talking to people. And in the process, you can never afford to be the one that's the naysayer. I can't be negative. I cannot afford to be negative. As a matter of fact, I hate being around negative people. It's kind of like being around a negative person. It's kind of like sitting around and purposely draining your own battery. You know, you just feel like you need to go take a nap after hanging around with some people. And I don't sleep well as it is. So you know, all sorts of things. That the job is simple but complex. But the main thing is care more about people than you do about party and about politics, and do things that make sense, but use facts and data to do it, so that you can justify the decisions you're making, but do it in a way that has an outcome that is going to raise the level of the people in the city. Care about them, and they'll care about you, and they'll get things done. Easy.
I think you're almost ready for retirement.
Well, I ain't retiring.
Just
I got to
kidding.
go out and make a living now.
Mayor James, thank you so much. Really
Thank you.
appreciate your
Appreciate
talk. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.